Hello everyone and welcome back to our shir in Dirshu Bahalacha. Today's daf is going to be Reish Nun Vav Amud Aleph. We're actually holding on the bottom of Reish Nun Hey Amud Beis. We're in Siman Shin Pei Vav and we're up to Siv Vav. So we've been discussing the types of foods and the amount of foods that you need in order to make a Shetufei Mevuos. So the Mechaber says in Siv Vav, Kol Davar Sherigilim Lalafis Bay as Hapas. Any food item that's used as a condiment to eat bread with. So this is something that is not the meal itself. It's not the food of the meal itself. Rather, it comes as a condiment that's eaten together with the bread. So the bread is the thing, is the mazain. The bread is the substance of the meal that you're going to fill yourself up with. And this other food item that we're calling a condiment is something to give flavor, to give taste to the substance of the meal. So, kol davar sherigilin lalafis bayis hapas, anything that's used as a condiment to be eaten together with the bread of the meal, shiurai, the minimum measurement that you need of that food item to make a shitufei mevuos, shiurai lalafis by pas hanechal lishtei seudais. You need the amount of that condiment that you would use for mazain shtei seudais. So, let's just get this straight. If you are making the shitufei mevuos with bread, so the bread is the mazain. When you're using a food item which is the mazain itself, which is the thing that you eat for the meal to fill yourself up with, then the share that you need mazain shtei seudais. So you would need enough pas to have 2 meals. But if you're using a condiment for the shitufei mevuos, then you don't need, let's say we were talking about pickles. You're not the pickles are something lalafis bayis hapas. It's something that you eat together with the bread. So you don't need enough pickles to have pickles for mazain shtei seudais to make 2 meals out of pickles. No, you need enough pickles that you would use in 2 meals. How many pickles would you use as a condiment for 2 meals? That's the amount that you would need for the shetufei mevuos. So again, if it's the mazain itself, if it's the bread, so then you need enough bread to make 2 meals out of. If it's a condiment, then it's the normal amount of that condiment that would accompany 2 meals. That's what the Mechaber is saying. V'chol she'ein melaftin by hapas, anything that's not used as an accompaniment, I keep using the word a condiment, I think that's accurate. If it's something that's not an accompaniment, rather it's something that you use for the meal itself, shiurai kedei lechol mimenu shtei sudais, then the minimum share that you need is the amount that you would make 2 meals out of. Let's stop here for a second and go into the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Lamed Aleph on the bottom of Reish Nun Hey Amud Beis. Shiurei lelafis bay, says the Chavetz Chaim, v'sagi bazeh. If it's an accompaniment, it's enough to have the amount of that accompaniment that you would typically use in 2 meals. You don't need enough of that food item to make a full 2 meals out of. Rather, just the normal amount you would use as an accompaniment for 2 meals. Then the Mechaber said, if it's, we didn't do this yet. Now on the second line in the Mechaber on Reish Nun Vav Amud Aleph, Ubasar Chai, raw meat, lo yehevi lifton. Raw meat is not an accompaniment. And I know you're all wondering about this raw meat. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, let's just see what the Mechaber says. The Mechaber says raw meat is not treated as an accompaniment. Therefore, v'tzarech kedei sheyochal mimenu shtei seudais. So if you wanted to make any shitufei mevuos out of raw meat, you would need an amount of raw meat to make a full 2 meals out of, not a lesser amount that you would use lalafis bayis hapas as an accompaniment for bread, because raw meat is not an accompaniment. Raw meat is something that you would have to eat on its own. Now let's pause here for a second, and let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Lamed Beis. Lo yehevi lifton, raw meat is not an accompaniment. De'ein regilin lalafis bayis hapas, because that's not the way it was used. You didn't use it as an accompaniment with bread. Therefore, you can't get away with using the lesser amount and saying, okay, I have enough raw meat here to comprise the amount of raw meat I would use as an accompaniment to bread for 2 meals. You can't say that because raw meat is not used as an accompaniment to bread. So how much raw meat would you need? You would need enough raw meat to look at and say, okay, this would suffice for 2 meals where all I'm eating is the raw meat. Now let's, before we go to the Bir Halacha, let's see Yis Katan Lamed Gimel. Therefore, V'tzarech Kedei Sheyochel Mimenu, Ayin Bir Halacha. Says the Chavetz Chaim, let's look at the Bir Halacha to answer the question that everybody has. So let's look at the Bir Halacha, Dibra Maschel Basar Chai, V'tzarech Kedei. So the Mechaber said that raw meat is not an accompaniment, therefore you need enough raw meat to make 2 meals out of. Ayin Berajba Uberitva. Take a look in the words of the Rajba and the Ritva. Shetamu al zeh. They react in wonderment to this halacha. The habasar chai lav barachilahu. What are we talking about? Raw meat. You can't eat raw meat. So what does that mean? How much raw meat and enough raw meat to make 2 meals out of? You don't eat raw meat. The tertzu, and what the answer is that we're not really talking about raw meat. The Da'iri bebasar maluach harbe. We're talking about very heavily salted meat. Ad she'enoi nechal machmas milchoi. It's so heavily salted that typically this meat would not even be eaten because it's simply too salty. Val yedei amalicha, but through the salting process, nisrakech, the meat has become soft. V'nasa roi la'achila ktsas, and it is somewhat edible, so that in a pinch somebody will eat this. I mean, the truth is, I think this is how corned beef came around. A lot of people wonder, why is corned beef called corned beef? What does the yummy deli that we make sandwiches out of, what does it have to do with corn? Why is it called corned beef? And the answer is that it has nothing to do with corn. The reason it's called corned beef is because the word corn in proper English, if you go to England, I don't know if it's still this way now, but it definitely was this way in times gone by, they used the word corn the same way we use the word kernel. So we refer to a kernel of corn or to a kernel of salt or a grain of salt. They spoke about a corn of salt. So a grain of salt was called a corn of salt. Corned beef was what the English called salt beef. And the truth is that the English Navy subsisted on salt beef. That's what they served the people who, the officers and the people who manned the ships of the English Navy that would go out to sea for months and months and months at a time. What did they subsist on other than fish that they caught at sea? They had salt beef. And the way they prepared the salt beef was they took raw beef, they had big tables with frames around them, they packed them full of salt, and they literally buried strips of meat in the salt. The salt acted as a preservative, and they never cooked that meat. It sat there in the salt, and it became preserved, and it also got soft. And they would eat it for months and months and months. So this salt beef is something that is edible, but it's kind of edible in a pinch. So therefore the Bir Halacha says that's what the Mechaber is talking about over here. He's talking about this basar chai, this is salt beef, which is edible, but it was not used lalafis by as a pas. So v'tirtzu da'arvi b'basar maluach harbe at she'ein nechal machmas milchai v'al yedei ha'malicha disrakich v'nasa roy lachil k'tzas v'oid tiritz ha'ritva. The Ritva has another explanation of this. Dein kavanos hashas al chai mamish. When the Gemara speaks about this halacha, it doesn't mean raw meat. Ki im al basar shu mevushel tzas, it's partially cooked. Veinu mevushel kal tzarchai. We're talking about very rare meat. So it was slightly cooked, but not mevushel kal tzarchai. So again, it's something which is somewhat edible. If you look at the last few words of this Bir Halacha, v'zeh roy la'achila mikri. It's cooked enough to become roy la'achila. So that's what the Mechaber is speaking about over here when he says that basar chai is not a lifton. This type of either salt beef or very rare beef was not eaten as an accompaniment to bread, so you can't get away with using the lesser shear of an accompaniment. So what shear do you have to use? You have to use the shear. I would have to have enough of this salt beef to make a full 2 meals out of. Now let's go back up into the Mechaber. By me it's on the second line. Aval tzli, roasted meat, heavy lifton. That is considered an accompaniment. Over here in the rich America, Sometimes we eat meat and we eat enough meat, just fill up on meat. Somebody makes a roast and they eat 3-4 big slices of roast and they don't have any starch with it. Maybe they have a little mashed potatoes with it. They don't have bread at all and they want to fill up on the meat. But that's not the right way to eat it, and certainly that's not in the time of the Gemara how they ate meat. Meat was too expensive and too valuable for that. So you filled up on bread and you had a little meat as an accompaniment. So roasted beef, that's an accompaniment. And therefore the Mechaber says, V'shir lalafis b'ishtei seudais. So the minimum amount of meat that you would need for a shituf is the amount of meat that's eaten as an accompaniment to bread for 2 meals. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah here. Ois katan lamed dalid. Tzli heavy lifton, roasted meat is treated as an accompaniment. Va'afilu yesh b'kaimoi she'eichlin oisai b'loi pas. Even if there are places like here in America where meat is eaten without bread, so maybe you might think, oh, if we want to make a shituf here in America out of meat, maybe we need the greater shear, the greater measurement of enough meat for 2 seudais. Batla daiton eitzel kol adam. In those places we say batla daiton. Just because they do something that's weird, they eat meat without bread and they fill up on meat, that's not considered normal behavior. That's not what the majority of people in the world do. Therefore, what they do is batal. It's nullified against what most people do, and therefore you treat it as an accompaniment. V'chein basam avushal dinoi kitzli. Chavetz Chaim says, don't think that when the Mechaber talks about roasted meat, he's referring to specifically roasted but not cooked. Cooked meat would be treated the same way. Back into the Mechaber continues and he says, Chaimitz heavy lifton. Vinegar is treated as an accompaniment. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Lamed Hey, Chaimitz heavy lifton, vinegar is an accompaniment. V'shiurai, and the minimum amount of vinegar to use for a shituf would be kedei letabel by yarak mazayin shtei seudais hanechal b'loi pas. You would need enough vinegar to use as a dip for vegetables. They used it as a dressing. So if you're eating vegetables, how much vinegar do you need to accompany a meal of vegetables? So you would have a meal of vegetables, you'd have a big plate of carrots and potatoes and peppers or whatever it is. That's what you're filling up on, and you have your vinegar as a dip. So how much vinegar dip do you need for a vegetable meal, for 2 vegetable meals? And the Chavetz Chaim points out, we're talking about a vegetable meal that is without bread. Now, you need less vinegar if you have bread, because it's the vegetables that you're dipping in to the vinegar. Now, if you're filling up on your meal on bread, you're going to have less vegetables. If you have less vegetables, you need less vinegar. Says the Chavetz Chaim, when the Mechaber says that vinegar is a lifton and you need the amount of vinegar you need as an accompaniment for 2 meals, he means 2 vegetable meals without bread. So you need more vinegar than you would need if you were having bread with your vegetables. And the Chavetz Chaim continues, and he says, "V'nispar b'paiskim," it becomes clear from the words of the paiskim, "T'shiurai b'revius," that the minimum share of vinegar is a revius of vinegar, and a revius is somewhere between about 2 ounces to about 4 ounces. Okay, says the Mechaber weiter, "V'chein yayin mevushel." Cooked wine is also treated as an accompaniment. Aval yayin chai, but uncooked wine, lo yehev a lifton, is not considered an accompaniment to a meal. V'shiyuroi shtei revios. And if it was uncooked wine, so then the minimum shear is 2 revios, a revius for each meal. V'chein shear sha'ar mashkim, and a revius would also be the minimum amount for other types of drinks. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Lamed Vav, V'chein yayin mevushel, cooked wine is treated as an accompaniment. Melashon zeh mashma, the implication of the words on the Mechaber is, T'shiyuroi kedei lalafis by pas shal shtei seudais. The Mechaber says over here that yayin mevushel, cooked wine, is an accompaniment. Okay, it's an accompaniment to what? Lalafis bayas apas, I guess to eat with bread. So the implication would be, how much cooked wine do you need to eat together with bread for 2 meals? However, there are others that say that this cooked wine is not used as an accompaniment to the bread, so you need enough cooked wine to accompany the bread of 2 meals. Rather, the cooked wine was used as a dessert, and therefore you would need enough cooked wine to use as dessert for 2 meals, which apparently is a lesser shear than the amount of cooked wine you would use as a dip for the bread of 2 sudas. However, the majority of Paiskim do not rule this way. They go like the first opinion over here, that it means lalafis by es hapas. Then we said that Yain Chai, raw wine, is not a lifton. Ois cotton lamed zayin, loy of a lifton, it's not an accompaniment. Dein derech lalafis boy, because it's not used as a dip. Hilkach be'inan dafka shir shtei sudos. So you would need enough uncooked wine to drink by 2 meals. Tehu shtei revios, which is 2 revios, a revios for each meal. Now we go to Sif Zayin in the Mechaber. Mishtatvin b'shnei beitzim. You could make a shetufei bevuos out of 2 eggs. Afilu chayim, even if these eggs are raw. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut lamed ches. Afilu chayim, even 2 raw eggs. De zimnin de soyadin behen al piatchak, because a raw egg was usable as a meal in extenuating circumstances. If you didn't have anything else to eat, you could crack open an egg and eat an egg as your meal. Nowadays, we're all worried about salmonella. Not sure if the worry of salmonella that we have is a realistic one. I mean, I shouldn't say that. It is a realistic one. I know people who have contracted salmonella, apparently from raw eggs, but I don't know if it's the type of thing which is still a miyuta, and it's just that the media and the press have us all worried about it, or something changed and salmonella is a little bit more prevalent than it used to be. I don't know. I'm not an authority on the topic. I can't tell you. But nowadays we seem to be afraid. When I was growing up, we ate raw eggs, not just to crack open a raw egg and eat it, but definitely we made desserts out of raw eggs, and we made ice cream out of raw eggs, and raw eggs were sometimes added to drinks, and nobody ran around worried about salmonella. We ate cookie dough, and we ate, when our mothers made cake batters, we greedily licked up the mixer bowl and licked up the batter. And nowadays, if mommy sees a little kid licking the batter from the mixer bowl, oy vey, raw eggs. I don't know. I don't know what the reality of the issue is, if it's a bigger problem nowadays than it used to be or not, but we're definitely more fearful of it nowadays, that's for sure. Says the Mechaber weiter, Bishnei Rimoinim, you could make a shetufei bevuos out of 2 pomegranates, b'chamisha afraskim, or with 5 peaches. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Cotton Lamed Tes, Bishnei Rimoinim b'chamisha afraskin, with 2 pomegranates or 5 peaches. Says the Mishnah Berurah, De'elu dvarim regilin lavoi likinuach suda. Pomegranates and peaches were considered very chashuv. So you would take 2 pomegranates. 2 pomegranates would be dessert for 2 meals. You break open the pomegranate, you take out the seeds, you put them in a little bowl. 1 pomegranate, that's enough for the dessert of 1 meal. It's a davar chashuv, you don't need a lot of it. 5 peaches was enough for dessert for 2 meals. These are chashuv enough to serve as dessert for 2 meals. The Gemara also says, the ma'arvin ba'asara egoizim, you can make an erev or a shituf with 10 walnuts, or with 1 esrog, mehai taima, the chashivi. Again, because these are chashuv. When something is chashuv, you don't need a lot of it for dessert. It's a davar chashuv, you take a little bit. So 1 pomegranate is enough for the dessert of 2 meals, of 1 meal. So you need 2 pomegranates. 2.5 peaches is enough for the dessert of 1 meal. So you need 5 peaches, or 1 esrog, or 10 walnuts. Says the Mechaber weiter, Belitra yerek, you could make a shituf out of a litra of vegetables, and we'll see how much that is, bein chai, bein mavushal, whether they're raw vegetables or cooked vegetables. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah is cut mem, belitra yarok, with a litra of vegetables, the bepachas mizel loy chashivi. Again, we're dealing over here with chashivas. When it comes to vegetables, a litra of vegetables is chashiv, and because of its chashivas, a litra of vegetables is enough for 2 meals. You're eating a davar chashuv. You're eating a davar chashuv. A litra is enough to cover for 2 meals. And it doesn't matter if it's raw vegetables or cooked vegetables. Of course, we have to go back and let's see Mishnah Berurah is cut mem aleph bein chai bein mavushal ayla el besif cut chavav. The Mishnah Berurah refers you back to Mishnah Berurah is cut chavav on the previous page, where we said that when it comes to vegetables, it depends how those vegetables are eaten. If it's a vegetable that could be eaten raw, so fine. If it's a vegetable that's eaten cooked, fine. You have vegetables that are eaten raw and cooked. But even a vegetable that's eaten raw and cooked, if it's only partially cooked and it's not fully cooked, we said yesterday you can't make a sheetuf out of that because now it's ruined. It's not raw and it's not cooked, so it's kosher la'achila. It's not something you want to eat. When the Mechaber says over here a litra of vegetables, it has to be either a litra of vegetables that are fully cooked or a litra of vegetables that are fully raw. How much is a litra? So the Mefarshim say that a litra, it seems to be a machlokes rishonim. A litra is either 4 lug or 2 lug, which is 1 second. Am I right? I bet you the Dirshu brings something down here. Let me just check myself. Let's take a look in the Dirshu footnote number 28. The litra yerek v'shiyurai. What's the measurement of a litra? Ladas Rashi. Yeah, this is like I said. It's a machlokes rishonim. Ladas Rashi brings down Rashi from Chaf Tes Amud Aleph. Who lug? That's the litra is a lug. Dahainu dalid reviyos. So that's 4 reviyos. A reviyos, like I said, is somewhere between 2 ounces and 4 ounces. So this would be 4 reviyos. Ladas Rambam, according to the Shitas Rambam, who shtei reviyos. A litra is 2 reviyos. The cause of a kafachayim shalachatchili yesh lahachmer kedas Rashi that a litra is 4 reviyos. Okay, let's go weiter. Back into the Mechaber, right by the ice cut membeis for the Mishnah Berurah. Bepulim lachim. You can make a shituf or an erev out of moist beans. Kimaloy ayad, a handful of moist beans. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ice cut mem gimel membeis. Bepulin lachin shadaka lechal chayin. Moist beans could be eaten when they're raw. They're not dried. The dried beans are hard. You break your teeth. But moist beans, you could eat them even raw. Kimaloy ayad shezer shir lalafis beishtei sudais. A handful of moist beans is what you would eat as an accompaniment to 2 meals. Says the Mechaber weiter, betapuche yar meloy hakav. Wild apples, you would need a kav of wild apples for the proper shear. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut mem dalid, but tapuche yar levisha ein derech lachan el yadat chak. Wild apples are not choshev. You don't eat them. Only if you're stuck, that's when you eat them. So we can't give them a minimal shear and say enough wild apples that you would use lalafis bayas hapas. No, they're not a davar choshev. That shear doesn't exist by wild apples. So wild apples, the only share that we could give them is if you're out camping and you don't have anything to eat and you find wild apple trees, so you'll pull together enough apples that you need for 2 meals. So you need mazon shtei seudos of them. V'harbe paiskim cholkem al zeh. Mishnah Berurah says a lot of paiskim disagree with this psak of the Mechaber. V'daitam, they learn to bechol tapuchim dina hachi de bekav, that for all apples you need a kav because no apples are considered choshev, and since they're not choshev, you can't give them a lesser shear and treat them as a choshev, a dessert. So you only need a little bit for the dessert for 2 meals. No, they're not choshev enough for that. Therefore, you need mazon shtei seudos. Oid isa beGemara. The Gemara also says the gam tamarim, dates, ugroigros, dried figs, hashirhu kamalay akav. You would need a malay akav. V'shemen, and when it comes to oil, shiur would be revius. The minimal shear would be a revius, udevela, and a fig, a regular fig, shiure maneh, you would need a maneh. The reason, the measurement for this, for the wild apples, or according to these other opinions, any apples, the reason it's a big shear, malay akav, because we can't give a chashivus to less than that. It's not a davar chashuv that you'd be satisfied with just eating a little of. So we can't give it a lesser shear, so it's got to be a malay akav. Okay, let's push a little bit further. Says the Mechaber in Sif Ches, Mishtatfen afilu ba'irchol she'enu roiloi. You could make a shituf out of a type of food that you personally cannot eat. So let's say you have a peanut allergy. You could go ahead and make a shituf or an eruv out of peanuts, even though you can't eat peanuts. Why? Because somebody else could eat them. Im roy l'shamadam, as long as they are roy lachila to other people. Kigoin, for example, l'nazir biyayin. A nazir could make a shituf out of wine, even though the nazir himself is not allowed to drink wine. Uli Yisrael betruma. Or Yisrael could make an eruv or a shituf out of truma, even though he personally is not allowed to eat truma. Only the kain is allowed to eat truma. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut memvav, mishtatvin, huadin le'inyan eruvei tchumen. This din is not only by shitufei mevuais, it's by eruvei tchumen as well. V'chein kol elu ha'seifim ha'koidmin, shayach gam be'eruvei tchumen. This all applies to eruvei tchumen as well. V'loi be'eruvei chatzeros, but it does not apply to eruvei chatzeros. Deina ela b'pas. Let's remember, eruvei chatzeros, you have to use bread. You can't use other foodstuffs. But eruvei tchumen, and let's just remember what eruvei tchumen is. We're going to get up to it soon enough. We're going to be learning the halachas of eruvei tchumen. On Shabbos, there's a maximum distance you're allowed to walk out of the city limits, right? 2,000 amas. The way to go further than that, if you have to go further than that for a dvar mitzvah, is you set up an eruvei tchumen at the limit of the tchum. You make an eruv over there, you put a certain amount of food over there, and now that becomes your living place. And now you have 2,000 amas from there, not where you are on Erev Shabbos, right? Because you're allowed to go 2,000 amas on Shabbos. So at the 2,000 amma limit, you set up your food. Now we say, oh, it's as if you live there. So you get 2,000 amas from there. So the Chavetz Chaim is telling me here, all of these halachas that we learned all apply to eruvei tchumen as well. So you could make an eruvei tchumen using a food that you personally cannot eat, as long as somebody else can eat it. Ice cut mem zayin uli Yisrael betruma. A Yisrael could make a shituf or an eruvei tchumen out of truma. Hayil v'chazi l'kayin. Since a kayin is allowed to eat truma, so you can't eat truma, but the kayin can. Oh, but now, says the Chavetz Chaim, v'achshav shekulanu tamei mesim. Nowadays, where we all have the din of being tamei meis, ain truma tahira ru'uya l'shamadam. So now, real truma that's tahar, is not allowed to be eaten by anybody. Not a kayin, not a Yisrael. Nobody can eat truma tahira because nobody is considered tahar. Everybody is considered to be tamei meis. You're not allowed to eat truma if you're tamei. So nowadays, no one's allowed to eat truma. Therefore, ve'en la'arev ba. So nowadays, you would not be allowed to make an erev out of truma because truma tahira nobody could eat. Umikam makaim, nevertheless, bechala. How about with challah? Your wife went ahead and made challah for Shabbos, and she mixed up her dough, and now she separated challah from the dough. The challah also goes to the kain. Chavetz Chaim says that with challah, you should be allowed to go ahead and make a shituf. And if you look in the Sharet Zion, Ois Kat Mem Gimel, he says, Ayin Siman Taf Nun Zayin. Take a look in Siman Taf Nun Zayin. Demin Adin Chalas Chutz La'aretz Ru'uya L'Kayin Shetava L'Kiryai. Me'ikar Hadin, nowadays, if you're talking about Chalas Chutz La'aretz, the challah that we separate over here in Chutz La'aretz from produce that was grown in Chutz La'aretz, is allowed to be eaten by a kayin, even if he's considered a tamei meis. As long as he goes to the mikveh from Tumas Keri, he's allowed to eat it. And therefore the challah is considered chazi la'adam. We consider it that there is somebody who's allowed to eat it. So it is considered something which is edible to some people. Okay? Continues the Chavetz Chaim in Ois Kat Mem Zayin. Here's an interesting one. How about people who are makbid on not eating chadash? They only eat yashan. So they won't eat anything that's produced from the new crops until after Pesach, till after the first day Yom Tov of Pesach, the second day of Pesach. So if somebody who's makbid on yashan won't eat chadash, are you allowed to make a shituf out of chadash? If you personally are makbid on yashan, can you make a shituf out of chadash? Do you say, well, people who aren't makbid do eat it, and therefore it's considered roy l'shum adam? Or do you say that no, since you are makpid, you can't make a shituf? Says the Mishnah Berurah an interesting thing. Tolui bazeh. That would be dependent on the following question. Why are you makpid on yoshan? Im hu noyig rak mitzad chumra. If the reason you're makpid on yoshan is as a chumra, in other words, you recognize that really we paskin like the shitas, that you're allowed to eat chadash. That's what we paskin like. But even though that's the way we paskin, I'm taking on a personal chumrah, and I want to be makbid like those other shitas who say that you're not allowed to eat it. Kind of like putting on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. People who put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, they don't put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin because there's a suffix. Is the halacha like Rashi or is the halacha like Rabbeinu Tam? The halacha is like Rashi, and that's why we all put on Rashi tefillin. But since there's a choshev, a shita of the Rabbeinu Tam, since we have a Rishon, one of the Bali Tosfos, Rabbeinu Tam, who held that tefillin should be made a different way, and since tefillin is a choshev, a mitzvah, it's shakol keneged kol haTorah kula, so I want to be machmir, and I want to make sure that I put on tefillin even according to the Rabbeinu Tam. I want to be sure that I was yotze the mitzvah of tefillin. So that's a chumrah. So if you're makbid on yoshan as a chumrah, so then niradama arvin. I'm sorry, I made the wrong place. Then you can make a shituf because you understand that really you're allowed to eat chadash. So therefore, chadash is considered a food that is roy for people to eat because you realize you're allowed to eat it. But however, if you learned through the sugya and you came to the conclusion that according to your mind, according to the way you learned the sugya, you went through all the shitas, you went through all of the different raid that there is on the sugya, and you saw the famous Bach, and you understand why the Bach says that we should paskin like the Shita that says that you're allowed to eat chadash. You went through the whole sugya, and to your mind, it comes out that the halacha should really follow those who hold that you're not allowed to eat chadash. So then, you came to the conclusion that you're not allowed to eat it. So how can you make a shituf out of it? You can't make a shituf out of it if you hold no one's allowed to eat it. So then, also loyla arav l'shtatif by. Then you would not be allowed to make a shituf out of it. Okay, I think we're going to stop over here. So in the mechaber, we're the second line from the bottom by v'chein hanoider. Okay, Mirz Hashem, we'll continue from there next week. Okay, thank you so much for listening. Be well.